Man, my hands were shaking like crazy when I dialed his number. But oh boy, when I showed up at the ceremony, it was them who got the shock of their lives. I should have seen this coming. There were signs all along. David's mom, Martha, never really liked me. She'd be all nice when David was around, but the second we were alone, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She constantly picked apart my wedding choices, hated my dress, wanted a different venue, and kept pushing her own ideas. And when I didn't agree, she'd sulk like a toddler. I thought she was just being a control freak mom, but oh, how naive I was. I thought David was different, that he had my back. Boy, was I in for a rude awakening. I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. It was my wedding day, the big day I'd been planning for months, the day I'd spent loads of cash on. I was ready to walk down the aisle and start my future with David. Then, bam! My phone buzzed with a message from Martha: "We've taken your dress, the venue's cancelled, and David knows what's best. Don't make a scene, just go with it." At first, I thought I was still dreaming. My head was spinning, my stomach was in knots, and I had to read the text 3 times for it to sink in. I shot out of bed so fast, my heart was racing. I tried calling David, straight to voicemail. I called my maid of honor, Sarah, no answer. I rang up the venue, and the lady on the phone hesitated before saying, "Oh yeah, David called early this morning and cancelled everything. I'm so sorry." My hands were trembling, this couldn't be happening, it had to be some nightmare. I dashed to my closet, and sure enough, my dress was gone, my shoes were gone, even the veil was missing. Panic turned into something raw and fierce. They'd planned this out, hoping I'd be too shattered to fight back, but nope, they misjudged me. I threw on the first clothes my hands landed on and grabbed my keys. If my dress vanished, someone had to have taken it. My initial thought was to drive to David's place, but something told me not to bother. Instead, I went straight to Martha's. She opened the door, looking all smug. She didn't even pretend to be shocked to see me. "You need to calm down," she said, all cool. Calm down? I was in sweatpants on my wedding day, and this woman had the nerve to tell me to chill. "Where's my dress?" I demanded. Martha didn't flinch. "It's gone, and you won't need it anyway. The wedding is off." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "You don't have the power to cancel my wedding," I shot back. Her smirk made me want to wipe it off her face. "David made the call. He's doing what's best," she replied. I took a deep breath. "Where is he?" I asked. "Busy." I somehow didn't scream or break anything. I knew she wouldn't give me anything useful, so I left. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. If Martha pulled something like this, there was no way it was just about canceling the wedding. My gut told me worse was coming, and I needed answers. So I drove to the venue anyway. And there it was, cars were pulling into the parking lot, guests were arriving, and the place was decorated just how I'd planned because the wedding wasn't canceled. It just wasn't mine anymore. I got out of my car, walked towards the entrance, and no one stopped me. People smiled as I passed, clueless. I stepped inside and nearly lost it. There she was, Rachel, in a wedding dress. My wedding dress. My vision blurred with rage, my whole body went cold. Rachel had been my friend, always close with David. I ignored the comments, the little touches, the way she looked at him thinking I wouldn't notice. I was such an idiot. And now, there she was, standing at the altar with my fiancé, in my dress, at my wedding, like I was invisible. The betrayal was suffocating. It choked me, crushed my chest, made me feel like I was sinking. David stood there, all calm and collected, like this wasn't the most disgusting, humiliating stunt he'd ever pulled. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't some last-minute stunt or impulsive decision. This was a plan, a cold, calculated plan. David let me plan everything, let me send out invites, let me spend a fortune, thinking I was going to marry the love of my life, all while he was setting up to marry someone else. Wow, imagine waking up realizing your wedding got called off, and your fiancé just expects you to vanish like you're some girl he briefly dated. They seriously thought I'd just accept it and disappear. But they had no idea who they were messing with. I stood there, frozen, as everyone laughed and chatted, totally clueless that this wasn't just a normal wedding, it was a total hijack. Martha was up front, grinning like she'd pulled off the perfect heist. Rachel was adjusting my veil with this fake angelic glow. And David? Oh, he wasn't nervous or guilty. He wasn't even looking for me because he was in on it. Something inside me snapped, but instead of breaking down, I felt this weird calm wash over me. They took everything from me, my dress, my venue, my fiancé, my wedding, but I wasn't done yet. I straightened my shoulders and kept walking. People started to notice, some confused, and whispers began, but nobody stopped me until I got to the front row. Martha's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear. She quickly stood up, trying to block me. "You need to leave," she hissed. I just smiled and said, "I think I'll stay." The whispers got louder. Guests were nudging each other, and I noticed my cousin Rebecca staring, wide-eyed. I glanced at Sarah, my maid of honor and best friend, and saw guilt written all over her face. That hurt the most. She tried to say something, but I wasn't in the mood for excuses. I turned back to Martha, who was still pretending she had control. "You weren't invited," she said with a forced smile. I laughed out loud. "Really? Because last I checked, this was my wedding." David finally turned towards me, his face blank, but there was a flicker of panic in his eyes. Rachel, standing beside him, went pale as a ghost. People were definitely watching now. David stepped forward, trying to keep calm. "Let's not do this here," he said. I tilted my head. "Oh, but you wanted to do this here, didn't you? I mean, you planned this whole thing behind my back." Rachel tried to grab David's arm like she could somehow fix this, but I cut her off. "You didn't what, Rachel? Didn't steal my fiancé? Didn't wear my dress? Didn't let me plan my own wedding while you waited to take my place?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. I turned back to David. "How long?" I asked. No answer. "How long have you been planning this?" Still nothing. Rachel fidgeted. "It just happened," she muttered. I laughed sharply. "It just happened? Oh, so you just tripped and fell into my wedding dress? Into my fiancé's bed?" Martha sighed dramatically. "Stop making a scene." I snapped my head toward her. "You planned this, didn't you?" She didn't deny it. I nodded, feeling a cold, detached calm. "You know what, Martha? I was ready to be the bigger person, to marry your son and tolerate you for the rest of my life." I took a step closer and whispered so only she could hear, "But now I'm going to destroy you." She flinched. "Good." David finally spoke again, way too calm. "It's over, okay? Let's just move on." "Move on? Really?" I felt something inside me snap. "All right then," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let's tell everyone exactly what's going on." I hit play, and Martha's voice blared through the speakers. "We've taken your dress, the venue is cancelled, and your fiancé knows what's best." Gasps echoed around the room, and then David's voice came through. "Babe, I'm sorry, but my mom is right. You're just not good enough. Rachel is better suited for me. She'll be a proper wife." The room went silent. So quiet someone dropped their champagne glass. Rachel stepped away from David, horrified, and Martha's face turned pale. David looked ready to puke. I let the moment sink in, then turned to Rachel. "Still want him?" She bolted. Martha turned to David. "You told her that?" David was frozen, like he couldn't process how bad this was going. Then I pulled out another piece of paper. "You know what else I have?" I slowly unfolded it. "The bill for the wedding." Martha's head snapped towards me. "What?" "See, David and I signed financial agreements before the wedding, which means he owes me for everything." Her mouth fell open. $35,000, I read the number off the paper. "Do it immediately." David's face was pure horror. "That's not," I shrugged, "it's in writing. Signed. Legal." I smiled, "And if you don't pay," I leaned in, "well, you know." Oh man, do I love a juicy public scandal. So there I was, with Martha looking like she was about to faint and David stumbling over his words, trying to tell me, "You can't." But I just grinned and faced the crowd, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, grab your popcorn because this drama isn't over yet." David had this look like a trapped rat, and poor Martha was opening and shutting her mouth like a fish out of water, speechless. The guests were in shock, with some folks recording every second on their phones. Rachel had done the disappearing act, good riddance, but my so-called best friend Sarah was still there, frozen with guilt. I wasn't going to let David off the hook. He'd taken everything from me, just like his mother had always wanted. They thought they could shame me into silence, but they had no idea what I was capable of. Just as Martha was gearing up to squawk out some excuse, the door swung open and in walked my lawyer, sharp suit, briefcase, the whole 9 yards. He was like, "Sorry for the interruption," loud enough for everyone to hear. "And David?" He went pale as a ghost. I waved at everyone, saying, "Timing is everything." Martha actually clung to David like he was about to pass out. She sneered at me, "You got a lawyer?" "Oh, honey, of course I did. You and your son swiped my wedding, my money, and my time. Did you really think I wouldn't lawyer up?" The crowd gasped while some started whispering. David finally managed to speak, saying it was ridiculous. My lawyer didn't even give him a glance. Based on the pre-event agreement, he explained, David here is on the hook for all wedding costs, $35,000, can't negotiate it away. And Martha? She lost it, calling it a scam. The lawyer stayed cool, no ma'am, it's all legal. You planned a wedding and swapped out the bride last minute, now your son foots the bill. David looked like he'd seen a ghost. My lawyer added, you've got till the end of the day before legal action kicks in. Somewhere, a waiter tried not to laugh, and someone in the crowd muttered, holy shit. Then Sarah spoke up, shaky voice and all. I wasn't sure I was ready for what she had to spill, but there she was, breaking down. She confessed she'd known all along. David's mom had told her they planned to replace me, and if Sarah warned me, she'd lose her job. Turns out, Martha owns the company Sarah works at. More murmurs from the crowd. Sarah pleaded with me, I'm sorry. I was scared. I was weak. But I couldn't deal with that right then. I turned back to David and Martha, accusing them of threatening my best friend over this mess. Martha just rolled her eyes, like it was no big deal. But Sarah wasn't finished, she demanded David confess the rest. Martha tried to shut her up, but Sarah wasn't backing down. She pushed David to spill, and he did, whispering, Rachel's pregnant. The room went wild. I could barely stand. Pregnant? Rachel, who was supposed to be my friend, had stolen my fiancé, my dress, my wedding, and now, a baby. David had the nerve to look apologetic, but an apology wasn't going to cut it. I glared at Martha, realizing this was the reason they wanted me gone. Rachel was expecting David's child. Martha shrugged, saying Rachel was giving her son an heir, like we were living in some medieval drama. David tried to explain, but I stopped him. I turned to the guests and said, let's give a big round of applause to David and Rachel, who are now expecting after stabbing me in the back. Some people actually clapped, and someone in the back said they needed more popcorn. David looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Martha was fuming. I'd had enough. I asked my lawyer if we were good, and he nodded. I smoothed down my suit and walked out, ready for my next move, because this was just the beginning. I should have just bailed, you know? I was so ready to leave, but something inside me was like, nah, you're not done here yet. After everything that happened, like the whole wedding fiasco, the lies, and the ultimate betrayal, there was still something missing that I needed to figure out. So, I glanced back at David. He was rubbing his temples like he had the world's worst headache, acting like I was just some annoying issue he had to manage. And then there was Martha, muttering under her breath and shooting Sarah a look that could melt steel, pretty much wishing she could blast her with laser eyes. The guests? Oh, they were totally engrossed in the drama. Some had their hands over their mouths, super shocked, while others were busy recording the whole mess on their phones. And just then, Rachel stormed back in, looking absolutely furious, not even a bit guilty or embarrassed. She was like, you just had to ruin everything, and as she marched down the aisle, you'd swear she still thought she owned the place, wearing my wedding dress and all. I just raised an eyebrow and said, oh, I'm sorry, did I mess up your big day? She crossed her arms and was practically panting with anger. You weren't supposed to find out like this, she hissed. I was stunned for a second, but then I laughed. You're unbelievable, I said, breaking into genuine laughter. Which part did you think I wouldn't find out? The part where you stole my fiancé, wore my dress, or are pregnant with his baby? She flinched at that, and it hit me, that little tidbit wasn't supposed to come out. David just groaned, Rachel, stop talking. But I wasn't gonna let up. What else is there, Rachel? I pressed. You might as well spill it all now. She looked away, and Martha suddenly stepped in, clearly panicked, telling Rachel not to dare. But it was too late. Rachel snapped back, you think I'm the bad guy? She spat. Do you even know what I was promised? The entire room went dead silent. David's head jerked up, Rachel, shut up, but she was done with secrets. They told me I'd have a perfect life, she spilled, eyes fiery. That David would marry me, we'd be this perfect couple, and I'd be the new face of their family. I felt my stomach turn over as I realized Martha had orchestrated this way before today, handpicking Rachel like a replacement doll, and David? Well, he'd gone along with it. Rachel's voice shook as she went on, but now I see the truth. I was never gonna be the wife. I was just a way to get rid of you, and once the baby is here, she turned on Martha, eyes narrowing, you were gonna push me out too, weren't you? Martha's face hardened. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped back. Rachel took a step closer, shaking her head. Oh my God, you were weren't you? That's why you kept saying the baby was the only thing that mattered. David stiffened. Rachel, let's talk about this later, but she was full on spiraling now. You lied to me, she whispered at him. You said you loved me. Martha scoffed. Love doesn't matter, Rachel. A strong family matters. And that did it. Rachel lost it, ripping off the veil and chucking it at Martha's feet with a bitter laugh. I was just another pawn, she cracked, pointing at me. And suddenly, it all made sense. Rachel wasn't my replacement, Rachel and I were the same. She'd fallen for it too, only I got out before it was too late. Rachel wiped her eyes, turned, and without another word, walked out. David called after her, now in a panic, Rachel, Rachel, wait, but she didn't stop. And then Martha flipped, pointing at me. This is your fault. She screamed. I blinked. My fault? She jabbed her finger at my chest. If you'd just walked away quietly, none of this would have happened. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. You really don't get it, do you? I said. David didn't love me, and guess what? He doesn't love Rachel either. You've controlled his whole life, and now you've ruined it. David just stood there, silent, finally realizing he'd lost everything. I could have destroyed him with one last brutal remark, but honestly, he wasn't worth it. None of them were. So I simply stepped back, turned to my lawyer, and said, let's go. He nodded, adjusting his tie. We'll send the final paperwork later. And I walked down that aisle, the one I was supposed to walk down in a white dress, past the stunned guests, the whispers, and Martha's rage. I didn't stop, and I didn't look back. David tried reaching out, of course. The messages were desperate. Can we talk? I messed up. I just need a chance to explain. I never answered. Rachel disappeared, she moved out of state, and no one really knows where she ended up. Martha lost everything. David couldn't bounce back from the public humiliation. The wedding scandal spread like wildfire, his business deals fell through, and people stopped trusting him. When Martha's reputation plummeted, she turned on David. I heard she moved away, trying to start over without him. Karma really did its thing, and me? I thrived. I moved to a new city, found a real job, and started building a life of my own. So, my real friends and I just quit looking back at all that drama. Honestly, I came out on top, and not because I got even or embarrassed anyone. I won simply because I walked away and built a life that's way better than the one they try to trap me in. Nowadays, when I think about that day, that text, and all the betrayal and chaos, I feel nothing, absolutely nothing. And honestly, that's the best kind of revenge there is.